Hello everybody, Jack the Jobber back once again. I hope everybody's had a wonderful new year. And it's time to look at my top 50 matches of 2025. No messing around, let's get into it. Thank you to the people on the Patreon. There's the Patreon people. Right, let's do this. 50 best matches of 2025, let's go. At number 50, I have Jon Moxley versus Konosuke Takeshita on AEW Collision, part of the Continental Classic Tournament. Not much to say about this one, just a real proper heavyweight TV main event between two of the best wrestlers around today. Great start. Excellent selling throughout from Moxley as well, I should point out. On to number 49, FTR versus the Outrunners. This was a really fun one. Old school, southern style tag team wrestling, updated for the modern age in terms of the pace and the in-ring action. But the gimmicks remain as old school as can be. Number 48, Drew McIntyre versus Damian Priest at WrestleMania. I thought this was a really fun, no DQ sprint of a match. Underrated by many, I imagine, for two reasons. Number one, the feud wasn't a great one and did feel like it really dragged, especially once Drew lost in Scotland. I imagine that still left quite a bad taste in the mouth. And the second reason, it immediately followed one of the best matches of the year, but we'll talk about that much later on. Number 47, Cody Rhodes versus Kevin Owens. Another WWE hardcore match. This one very different though, much more slow and much more epic in terms of its pacing and its tone. Cody was never realistically going to lose, which maybe impacts it very slightly, but it did have that big memorable spot to keep it fresh in everyone's minds still, the Alabama Slam through the ladder. I also like the side of Cody that we saw here, a lot more merciless than usual, which then made his actions at WrestleMania against John Cena all the more baffling. That match is not going to be on this. Of course it's not. Number 46, back to AEW now, Hangman Page versus Christopher Daniels. This was an emotional, bloody brawl between the man of the moment and one of the greats of the 21st century. And given that I believe Daniels was 54 years old at the time of this match, it just goes to show that he can still pull out an incredible in-ring performance too. He was also a key part of Hangman's character development over the course of 2025 on the whole. Number 45, back to WWE. I promise there are more than just these two promotions on this list, but for now, Bianca Belair and Naomi taking on Liv Morgan and Raquel Rodriguez for the tag team titles. This was a relatively simple but incredibly dramatic and incredibly well done title change, which is further evidence that Liv Morgan is the real hidden gem of WWE's women's division. I know everybody loves Liv, but she is sometimes overlooked when it comes to bigger names like Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch, or people who are kind of earmarked for success or have flashy in-ring styles like Stephanie Vaquer and Io Sky, more kind of internet darling types. But despite having none of those qualities, Liv Morgan has made herself a great wrestler anyway. Number 44, Jamie Hayter versus Mercedes Moné. This was an absolutely bruising pay-per-view opener between two of the best around today, and also it had the added high stakes of being the Owen Hart Women's Tournament final. A nice clash of styles here as well to kick off Double or Nothing 2025 with the kind of smash mouth, in your face Jamie Hayter against the much more sneaky, petulant and wily Mercedes Moné. Number 43, Fraxiom, the team of Nathan Fraser and Axiom, taking on the team of Yoshiki Inamura and Josh Briggs. Fraxiom were probably my favourite tag team of 2024. You can definitely argue about how competitive that category really truly is, but at the same time they were on form, and then in 2025 they bid farewell to NXT with a series of hit matches, this certainly being one of them. Now this isn't me kind of forgiving NXT for some baffling booking on a weekly basis, truly, but sometimes, because they have such a deep talent pool at their disposal, sometimes their roster can kind of drag them out of the mud. Number 42, a lot of people will think this one's too low, Jon Moxley versus Hangman Adam Page at All In Texas. Yes, I know it is quite low. Kind of a gruesome version of WWE's main event of WrestleMania 40, the big culmination, the big cathartic victory of the good guy over the bad guy at long, long last. It just went a little bit overboard for me, taking some of the spotlight away from Hangman being the one to do it, with all the run-ins, all the emotion, all the melodrama, which worked on its own level, to be fair, but just in my opinion cost it quite a few places on this list. Number 42, Tomohiro Ishii versus Gabe Kidd in New Japan. This was a little bit of a weird card coming very soon after Wrestle Kingdom and Wrestle Dynasty in California. And I saw this match getting quite a bit of, I think, unjustified criticism, possibly because it was the show opener and it was a 30-minute time limit draw. You have to be in the right frame of mind to watch it, but if you are in the right mood, then definitely stick it on and watch two men who are a brilliant and occasionally terrifying matchup for one another. Number 40, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Hechicero. This was from the exact same show, but it was very, very different in terms of style. And that's of course because it features two of the very best technical wrestlers in the world today putting on a technical classic. They could do so in their sleep. I would hesitate to say that this match is better than the one they had in Mexico in 2024, but it's still an incredible thing to watch. Just two men who are absolute masters of their craft. Number 39, we are heading to the all-women's WWE pay-per-view Evolution for the triple threat between Becky Lynch, Bayley, and Lyra Valkyria. I had Lyra down as my most underrated, or maybe underappreciated would have been more accurate, but underrated wrestler of the year. I think the booking has really held her back, but in terms of in-ring stuff, I think she is far, far better than a lot of people still realize. And that was never more apparent in 2025 than in this match, where she acted as the glue and the grit of an ultra-competitive main event featuring two far bigger names in Bayley and Becky Lynch. A great Lyra performance, a great performance from all three, to be fair. Number 38, Ethan Page versus Javon Evans. Not their rematch, which maybe gained a little bit more attention because it had a street fight stipulation attached to it. No, I'm talking about their first match, a normal singles match, with Javon nursing a broken jaw, taking place at Vengeance Day. This was a shockingly underrated match in my opinion. I thought it was very, very nicely done indeed. Maybe people didn't like the finish, with Ethan Page taking advantage of Javon's jaw injury to get kind of a flash surprise heel win. And then Javon would have to get revenge later on down the line. But for what it was, I thought it was perfectly done. Number 37, Konosuke Takeshita versus Orange Cassidy. This was a relatively short match, only going about 12 minutes, but it was a wonderful clash of both style and personality as well. It was the main event of a February edition of Dynamite, and they kind of held back just enough to leave us wanting another match, which we got later on in the Continental Classic. But for me, this original matchup was just a little bit better. Number 36, Io Sky versus Stephanie Vaquer at WrestlePalooza. On the whole, I was absolutely not a fan of WrestlePalooza. I thought it was a pretty bad pay-per-view outing from WWE, but the undisputed bright spot of the event was this match. This was for the title recently vacated by Naomi, and I think the main thing I remember about this match is the way the crowd weren't invested at first, and then the two women really dragged them into it, and by that excellent finishing stretch, the whole building was fully on board. Number 35, Mercedes Moné again, this time taking on Athena. Spring Breakthrough opened with a real clash of aces, it felt like. Mercedes Moné in unbeatable form as the TBS champion, taking on somebody very unbeatable in their own right, maybe even more so, the Ring of Honor Women's World Champion Athena. This match was, I think, very intelligently put together. It was given time and space for both women to really show what they can do, show why they're two of the best in the world, and they fully delivered. Number 34, Mark Briscoe versus Ricochet. This match was kind of silly and overblown, but Ricochet is one of the most silly and overblown heels in wrestling today, and Mark Briscoe has always been silly and overblown while still remaining one of the most naturally beloved babyfaces I can think of in today's wrestling landscape. This was their stretcher match at Double or Nothing. I think it was very much the right decision to give this match a stipulation. Both men could really cut loose, and I think it's when people maybe really started to get on board as well with Ricochet's new insufferable heelish persona. Get on board with it in the intended way, by hating him. Number 33, Zack Sabre Jr. back once again, this time taking on El Phantasmo in the G1 Climax. This was my favourite match of 2025's G1 Climax, a tournament which doesn't quite carry the same guarantee of like multiple match of the year candidates all within a relatively short stretch of time, like it did in the 2010s. But this match, I think, wouldn't have looked out of place during that hot period. Phantasmo maybe isn't for everybody, but occasionally I think he can surprise even his haters with this like resilient, brave, underdog babyface performance out of absolutely nowhere. That's exactly what he did here against Zack Sabre Jr., just like he did, in fact, in 2024 against Konosuke Takeshita. And speaking of Takeshita, number 32, Konosuke Takeshita versus Oleg Boltin at the New Beginning in Osaka. This is perhaps the most simple match of the entire countdown, featuring the relatively inexperienced amateur wrestler turned pro, but again only in recent years, Oleg Boltin. But that doesn't take away from the match at all. In fact, I think it could even be argued that it enhances the match. It's so simple, but it's in a New Japan show, so it's surrounded by all these guys who can do all these moves, and then you've just got this match of quite a rookie, really, taking on the infinitely more experienced Takeshita, but trying to down him anyway with raw strength and athletic ability. Number 31, Obafemi versus Javon Evans. This pair matched up multiple times in 2025, but my favourite was the main event of Heatwave, which featured one of the best table spots of the year and one of the best David versus Goliath clashes of 2025 as well. There is a very, very valid frustration with stars being built far too slowly in WWE these days, and it's one that I often agree with, and I hope that it isn't the case for Obafemi and Javon Evans, two men who really could and should be major stars of WWE's future. Hopefully the very near future. Number 30, Darby Allin versus Claudio Castagnoli, Falls Count Anywhere. Speaking of crazy table spots, the most memorable of 2025 must go to Claudio Castagnoli launching Darby Allin out of the ring through the announce table, during their Falls Count Anywhere match in AEW. I wouldn't say it's the only thing the match has going for it, because it's immensely enjoyable from start to finish and it doesn't outstay its welcome, but it probably is the most memorable part of the match. It's if you haven't seen it, find the GIF, it's scary. It's great. Number 29, Leon Slater versus Liam Slater versus Gene Money at North Wrestling. A shamelessly personal pick here, but it was my favorite match that I saw live in person in 2025, and I didn't have to go far to do it because it happened right here in Newcastle. I know I'm biased, but I do think that many people would agree that North Wrestling is one of the best indie promotions in the UK right now, and this was like the culmination of a very long main event storyline. Leon Slater, one of the best up-and-coming talents in World Wrestling, had been the champion for a very long time, coming into this triple threat match, taking on not only the rising crowd babyface Gene Money, but also his own trainer, Liam Slater. I've known Liam since about 2016, and there's a moment where he goes up top to steal Leon's 450 Swanton ludicrous finisher, and I thought he was going to get cut off because I was like, Liam can't do that move. He did. It's one of many brilliant moments, but I got out of my chair, so I did. Number 28, Kevin Owens versus Sami Zayn at Elimination Chamber. One of the biggest injury losses of 2025 had to be Kevin Owens, but at least we got to see him go toe-to-toe once again with his timeless foe and friend, and then foe again, Sami Zayn, in an unsanctioned match, no less. And yes, they're never able to go as truly crazy as they might have done back in their old Ring of Honor days, but even the slightly sanitized version in WWE is still light years ahead of most wrestling feuds out there. Number 27, Suzu Suzuki versus Mei Seira at All-Star Grand Queendom. All-Star Grand Queendom, right, is many people's show of 2025. I think I should give a bit of an explanation. I wasn't as hot on it as a lot of people were. In fact, I'm sure many people out there will say that my kind of lack of having Tam Nakano's retirement match in this top 50 is maybe my biggest snub of the entire list. I had two problems with a lot of Stardom's most beloved matches this year. One, I think a lot of them overshot the natural finish of the match, and then by the time the actual finish came around, the crowd were they'd already crested that wave. They were on their way down. And number two, some of the best matches, unfortunately, just had like one or two glaring botches that I just couldn't get out of my mind. But in terms of Suzuki versus Seira, that was absolutely not the case, as the pair went hell for leather in a brutal no DQ match. Not necessarily brutal for the use of weapons, because that was kind of kept to a minimum, but just in terms of the sheer hatred on display. Number 26, for the Ring of Honor World title, Bandido versus Konosuke Takeshita. This was an absolutely epic Ring of Honor title match, which was almost perfect and would have landed easily within my top 10, but I just thought there was a little bit of maybe finisher overkill down the stretch. However, I don't think I can think of another match in 2025, maybe one or two, but I can't think of many, which kind of were equally fun and epic and exciting, all in one package. This was definitely worth a watch between two of 2025's busiest and most impressive wrestlers too. Number 25, MJF versus Mark Briscoe, tables and tacks. I think AEW can often rightly be criticized for their more is more approach, whereas as we all know in wrestling, sometimes less very much is more. That was not the case in this match, where they really ramped up the tension over that first thumbtack bump. Then it exploded into life, and then it got kind of maximalist, but by that point, it felt really earned. Number 24, the men's Elimination Chamber match in WWE. Honestly, this is the absolute high point of Cena's retirement run for me, especially with the benefit of hindsight. Everybody in this match really came to play, but obviously the standout moments were the exchanges between CM Punk and John Cena, reminding us all of their amazing chemistry over the years, and also the finish with Seth Rollins attacking CM Punk despite already being eliminated because he hates him so much, and then Cena surprisingly taking advantage of this to win the match in kind of heelish fashion. But John Cena's not a heel, and then he turned heel. Obviously, the whole storyline went very wrong after that, but just in this moment, it felt really perfect, especially once we saw Cena's true motivations a few moments later. Number 3, a triple threat at AEW Dynasty, Kenny Omega versus Ricochet versus Speedball Mike Bailey. Triple threat matches, right, can often fall into the same kind of tired, predictable formula, with one guy resting on the outside, the other two going through basically a singles match in the ring, and then they all swap places. This triple threat is basically the antithesis of that formula. Clearly, all three guys had put a lot of thought into this one, constructing so many different moments, so many different sequences and spots where all three of them were involved. This was very ambitious, and it paid off. Number 22, one of the semi-finals of the men's Owen Hart tournament, Will Ospreay versus Konosuke Takeshita. There he is again. This was basically two super wrestlers blasting each other with everything they had. It also had a bit of an emotional pull as well. There was a bit of depth to this one, given Ospreay's past with the Don Callis family. But really, this was all about, can Ospreay get through to the men's Owen Hart tournament final? And yes, he could, but man, it took a big effort to get there. Great match. Number 21, Jordynne Grace versus Tessa Blanchard at TNA Genesis. Yeah, this might be an unpopular one, I think, because of all the criticism that Tessa has attracted due to her quite awful behavior in the past. Unfortunately, I do have to admit, I think she and Jordynne Grace put on TNA's comfortably their best match of 2025, way back in January. This match also, I think, benefited not only from the stellar in-ring work from both, but also from the kind of the accidental atmosphere it created, which was really intense. The crowd obviously hating Tessa, but also urging Jordynne Grace on, because this, of course, was her big farewell to TNA. Number 20, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Ricochet at Wrestle Dynasty. I think this is one of the most underrated matches of 2025, probably because it took place directly after like an undisputed match of the year contender. But this was such an ultimate clash of styles, the ultimate technician and the ultimate high flyer, each trying to outwit the other by using their own brand of wrestling. It's like something from Tekken or something, where everyone's really different. It's just not a groundbreaking point, but the match is a great one, and do give it a shot if you haven't. Number 19, Hiroki Goto versus David Finlay. Goto had a tremendously long overdue run at the top in 2025, finally getting his hands on the IWGP title. Having won the belt, one of his biggest challenges of the year was at Sakura Genesis, where he defended against the winner of the New Japan Cup, David Finlay. The action wasn't simple, full of twists and turns, but the story very much was, in a very pleasing way. The beloved champion and veteran taking on this wily and really devious opponent, trying to pull out all the stops and almost winning that belt at several points. The match had a very real sense of jeopardy, and I really enjoyed it for that. Number 18, the Street Profits versus DIY versus the Motor City Machine Guns. This match should have taken place at WrestleMania, but instead didn't, and took place on SmackDown instead, and clearly that may have annoyed all of these three teams because they put on, I think, quite a modern TLC classic. I can't sit and recap every cool thing that happened in this match. If you've seen it, you'll know exactly what I mean. It is wall-to-wall action. And maybe it's a good thing that it wasn't on WrestleMania, because at least it stood out on its own merit, away from all the botched Cena storyline stuff and the endless ad placement with the entrances and all the... It was a good match. Number 17, Sami Zayn versus Ilya Dragunov for the US title. Ilya Dragunov's surprise return to the active roster and his surprise US title win over Sami Zayn was, I think, a late contender for one of the TV matches of 2025. And the real strength behind this match was all about the matchup. That's because it paired together two of the most intense wrestlers in WWE. Intense in very different ways, but it made for an electric pairing. It also makes me kind of sad that we've not seen more of this matchup, because I think, if I'm correct, this was only their second ever match at the time of recording. Number 16, Hangman Adam Page versus Kyle Fletcher. No, not that one. Not the main event of the All Out pay-per-view, which was a very good match indeed, but just missed out on my top 50 because I thought it strayed slightly too far into forced epic territory. I'm talking about their match earlier in the year, in the semi-final of the Owen Hart tournament. Like the other semi-final I've already talked about, Ospreay versus Takeshita, this was like Hangman's real last hurdle to get to that final as well, with everybody rooting for him, because I don't think anybody wanted to see Kyle Fletcher in the final, because it would have telegraphed the result of that final. The heel was never going to win to go on to face Moxley. And the action itself is absolutely stellar. I often criticize Kyle Fletcher's finishing stretches in his matches for him surviving too much and then, you know, sprinting all around the ring, and in my opinion, just not selling quite consistently enough. But I obviously admit that he is one of the most talented wrestlers in the world today, and that's on full display here. Number 15, Zack Sabre Jr. versus his old stablemate, Taichi. This was a very intense and emotional clash in the New Japan Cup between fellow former stablemates Zack and Taichi, with Taichi fully stepping into this role of the underdog, which, having spent most of his New Japan time as a heel and all of his New Japan time as bigger than most other guys on the roster, he's not had too much of a chance to do so, but whenever he does, he's amazingly good at being the underdog babyface. Zack's on top form as well, playing kind of the cocky favourite who gets dragged into this far more epic battle than he was anticipating. Number 14, staying in New Japan for Gabe Kidd versus Yota Tsuji. This was an off-the-charts intense 20-minute heavyweight slugfest which ended in a double KO. And if that sounds like your sort of thing, you'll love this one. From what I've seen and read online though, I think this finish was quite divisive. Some people didn't like it, I certainly did, but it did lead to the feud being elongated, perhaps beyond its natural point, and the two guys trying to kind of recapture that same magic, but none of their other matches in 2025 matched up to this one, which was excellent. On the other hand, it wasn't even the best match on the card in which it took place. But more on that later. Number 13, Fraxiom versus Hank and Tank. I think this match proves that you don't have to be particularly experienced and you don't have to have been putting on match of the year contenders for like 10 years to have a match of this caliber. And that was absolutely proven here in NXT. And I think the big reason for that was the story of this match, which was the story of Hank and Tank being these kind of new on the scene underdog baby faces, very pure baby faces. Can they get it done against Fraxiom, who themselves are on the verge of breaking apart, it seemed like at the time. So there's like a double tension running through the match. And the main secret ingredient is crowd connection. Hank and Tank at this point were on absolute fire, and the crowd at several points in this match, you can feel them willing the challengers on to take those titles. Getting serious now into number 12, Obafemi versus Trick Williams versus Javon Evans. This was from the same event, which apparently Stand and Deliver was like one of my shows of the year, it seems, but this was very unlike that previous tag match I talked about. That tag match very much played according to the rules of pro wrestling tradition. Challengers, champions, favorites, underdogs, get the crowd on the side of the underdogs. This match, this triple threat, was just absolute chaos. It felt like all the rules went out the window. Even before this bout took place, Trick, Oba, and Javon could all realistically be seen as an incredible part of WWE's future, but I think that potential and that reputation was very much cemented here. If you need any more convincing to watch this match if you haven't seen it already, I kind of think of it in my mind automatically as a bit of a spiritual successor to Gunther versus Sheamus versus Drew at WrestleMania. And if that doesn't convince you, nothing will. Number 11, a super late addition to the top 50 here, almost getting into the top 10. Maybe recency bias, I don't know. It's Darby Allin versus Gabe Kidd at World's End. I'm gonna have to revisit this match once I've calmed down about it, but I loved this. It would have cracked my top 10 with ease were it not for two things just drawing it back slightly. One was the crowd, who were kind of burned out at this stage of the night, and two was the announce team, with Tony Schiavone in particular not bringing the right tone, I think, to what was a very terrifying and intense match. Like, Darby's clinging on and Gabe Kidd is punishing him. Darby's selling is, as always, some of the best selling in the world. And Tony's going like, oh, this Darby Kid's resilient. He's not even made his comeback yet, Tony. But when Darby does, it is, of course, electrifying. And then Gabe comes back at him, and it's just, and it doesn't go too long either. It is fantastic. Right, we're nearly there. But before the top 10, I do want to give a mention to several noteworthy matches that other people might have had as maybe even their match of the year. And I'll explain why it wasn't quite that for me. So these aren't honorable mentions. I guess these are like dishonorable mentions. Cody versus Cena. I enjoyed it definitely, and I thought it was Cena's last great performance at SummerSlam. But I don't think it felt entirely earned. The storyline hamstrung this match for me from fully enjoying it. Because why is Cena a babyface now? Just because he is. That didn't quite do it for me. AJ versus John Cena. I thought the Bray Wyatt tribute was good, but that aside, I was very confused at a lot of people saying this was a match of the year candidate when it felt way more like an exhibition, and I think there were loads more different matches this year which brought a more compelling story to the table. Seth versus Roman versus Punk at WrestleMania, a brilliant angle, I think, but the match was just good. I think I spent a lot of it waiting for the twists and turns to unfold, which kind of got in the match's way in terms of a contest. And that's fine sometimes, but not when it's the main event of a WrestleMania card. The Young Bucks versus Swerve and Ospreay. Athletically insane, impressive stuff, of course, but this should have been a tornado tag. A lot of this match was all four guys in the ring and the ref standing there letting them do it, and I'm a nerd and it ruined my immersion. The Anarchy in the Arena match, also in AEW, just not for me. Very, very silly. I enjoy silly matches sometimes, but this tried to be silly and epic, and if you like that sort of thing, this could well be one of the greatest matches of all time for you. It just wasn't for me. Tony versus Mercedes for the AEW Women's title. I was so ready to make this one of my matches of the year, and then Mercedes kicked out of 3 consecutive Storm Zeros, and again, my immersion was ruined. That's the saddest thing I've ever done. Fletcher versus Ospreay in the steel cage. I think a lot of people would have had that maybe as just their match of the year. Similarly, what I mentioned earlier about Kyle Fletcher, too much punishment given and received down the stretch, but it wasn't just Kyle, it was both Ospreay and Fletcher, and that's a shame, because at points, this match was ludicrously good. And finally, Fletcher versus Moxley at World's End. A brilliant match, but I'd have had it go on first. The previous match was Okada versus Takeshita, and once Okada had won, you knew that Fletcher wasn't going to beat Moxley, or at least I did, and that really robbed the match of a lot of its suspense for me. I just thought Moxley-Okada was a way more natural final than Fletcher-Okada would have been, and that proved to be the case. Right. It's time for the top 10. Number 10, Zack Sabre Jr. versus Konosuke Takeshita. Takeshita's all over this list. This was the match where Takeshita won the IWGP title despite, not being like a full-time New Japan wrestler. So you could argue that this was a surprise result, but the way they built the tension was magnificent. The central story being, can Takeshita survive Zack's infinite submission attempts and clever pinfall predicaments and all that sort of stuff? Can Takeshita survive that break free and use his power advantage to grab the win? New Japan's booking was quite heavily criticised throughout 2025, and I have to agree with a lot of that, but I also must say that just in terms of the title picture, I thought they got it mostly right over the course of the year. Case in point, our number 9. And that is Hiroki Goto versus Zack Sabre Jr., the rematch from later in the year. Now, if that previous match I just mentioned, Zack versus Takeshita, was Return of the Jedi, this match was absolutely The Empire Strikes Back. Except in this case, they're both of similar quality. Oh, do you see what I do? I'm not an authority on Star Wars. But that's what people tell me. Empire is meant to be the good one and also the dark one, and this match was a very dark one indeed, with basically Zack taking revenge on Goto for his much more feel-good win earlier in the year. And you know how Zack Sabre Jr. goes into matches looking to break his opponent down with limb work and submissions and all this kind of jiu-jitsu stuff. This is his plan succeeding, because often Zack's plan doesn't work and he has to switch to a different plan and then go back to that, or he just loses the match sometimes. But this was Zack's plan working to perfection. He broke Goto down and it ended via a referee stoppage, which is divisive, but I thought it worked perfectly. Moving on to number 8, and to CMLL for Mystico versus MJF. If the last match was a bit of brutal realism, this one is absolute fairy tale stuff. With like more blood though. Mystico is CMLL's top beloved babyface of their current era, and while I'm not quite as in love with him or CMLL's in-house style and output as many people seem to have been over the course of 2025, I have to confess, or I have to admit, that Mystico has such an electric connection with that crowd. And MJF, of course, is MJF, and especially when he's doing his American hero shtick, you can see why the crowd were so rabidly in Mystico's corner for this one. I don't really have much more to say about it. It's just a simple story, expertly told, and in my mind, the clear best Mexican match of 2025. Number 7, Io Sky versus Rhea Ripley versus Naomi at Evolution. The Money in the Bank briefcase stipulation is like 20 years old now, so sometimes it can be hard to get excited for a cash-in. This was the best cash-in in quite a long time. It was also a risky booking decision from WWE, which I think very much paid off, with Rhea and Io going out there in the main event and likely tearing the house down, which they did, and then you're going to go, well, we'll have a cash-in finish instead with Naomi winning and scooping it from under their noses. But it totally worked. Could have backfired, but it didn't at all. Most of the credit has to go to Rhea and Io, but I think Naomi deserves a lot of credit too for her character work building up to this moment. It meant that when she won the belt, it felt like a really exciting and slightly unhinged moment, and everyone lost their minds, even though, she's a heel. But who cares? It's the 21st century. Number 6, Io Sky versus Rhea Ripley versus Bianca Belair at WrestleMania. I think we can all agree that WrestleMania 41, when we look back from the future, it'll have a dark cloud over it. Mainly because of the mishandled main event stuff between John Cena and Cody Rhodes. Like, why was Travis Scott there? But thankfully, that Mania weekend did have one standout blow-away match, and that was the opener of Night 2. The action was incredible from all three women, of course, we all know that by this point, but I have to give credit as well to WWE, which sounds so weird on this weekend of all weekends, but I have to give credit to WWE's booking here as well. The way they managed our expectations in the build to this one was like the opposite of the Cena-Cody stuff. That's because we all, I think, kind of expected Io Sky to be the third wheel here, especially because she won the title in the build-up, and you'd think, well, this is kind of a transitional champion kind of thing. She's going to drop it to one of the two bigger names at WrestleMania. And instead, WWE subverted those expectations and even mentioned it directly in the storyline. And then when it came to the match itself, Io said, no, I'm going to win this one too. I love that as a story. But outside of kayfabe as well, all three women put in an incredible effort. And whoever put the match together as well, whoever road agented it. And yeah, really, really good. Number 5, Hangman Page versus MJF. Not their title match at Forbidden Door in London, which I saw live, and unfortunately I felt did a little bit too much in the finishing stretch in terms of like swerves and trying to shock the crowd rather than just have a banger. But luckily these two guys did have a banger earlier in the year and no one noticed. I think this is the single most underrated match of 2025. Whereas I think their London rematch had a bit of a convoluted mission statement, their first match had a very simple one. MJF thinks that Hangman Page can't beat him. He thinks he has Hangman's number, he thinks he can get under his skin, and he doesn't realize that this is a new Hangman Page, the next evolution of Hangman. Hangman is a little bit more composed now, very tough as always, and in the middle of the match, MJF realizes, there's this brilliant moment where MJF realizes, and we all realize, that no, he can't beat Hangman at all. And Hangman is definitely going to win, even before the pinfall has happened, and I love that moment. I also think this match looks even better in hindsight when we look at it as kind of the launching pad from which Hangman shot back up to the title scene as well. Really, really good match. It's the opener of Revolution, if you want to check it out. Why does no one talk about this match? Number 4, you knew it was going to be here somewhere, the Hollywood ending between Toni Storm and Mariah May. This was, I think, my favourite death match of 2025, if you can call it that. It was certainly my favourite no DQ match, or stipulation match of any type, really. And I think it was a massive success for two reasons, really. One, the tone of the action and the performances, I guess, but just the overall spectacle, which was gruesome and terrifying at points, and really, I think, pushed the limits of what we maybe expect to see from a mainstream promotion these days, which I know AEW does quite a lot, but yeah, I wasn't expecting this to be as brutal as it was. And secondly, the feud building up to it, with both women on absolutely top form with their character work. Mariah turning on Toni, winning the belt from her in shocking fashion, then Toni getting it back in heroic fashion in Australia, roared on by like her hometown crowd. And then this kind of exclamation point, but it wasn't just an exclamation point, it elevated everything in the feud before it as well, and made this a clash that, regardless of what either wrestler goes on to do for the rest of their careers, this will be an absolute highlight of them. At number 3, we have Zack Sabre Jr. versus Hiroki Goto, the first match. So I talked about the sequel where it ended with referee stoppage and it was very heartbreaking for Goto, but this was his ultimate moment of triumph earlier on in the year. It's incredible from start to finish, but the thing that really pushes it over the top for me and above most other matches is the finishing stretch, which really relies on us knowing that Goto has blown so many of these opportunities before. I think that finishing stretch has 3 separate pops from the crowd, which a lot of people still think, Japanese crowds usually very reserved, everything. Watch the finish to this match and you will know that that is not always the case. The first pop comes after Goto hits his first finisher, then he hits a second finisher consecutively, and the crowd lose their minds in a separate pop because they know he's about to win. And then the third pop is like a really jubilant one when he does make the pinfall and pick up that elusive IWGP title. The whole match is great. The performances from both men are great, but just as an emotional moment as well, it was, I think I had it down as my moment of 2025. Number 2, Hangman Page versus Will Ospreay in the Owen Hart Tournament final. Of course. I think this would be many people's match of 2025, and I couldn't argue with them too much because you just need to watch to understand why it's so great. I don't really know what to say about this one that isn't kind of self-evident. It's 2 of the best in the world having as good a match as they can. And the stakes are very high as well. Not only is it a tournament final, but it's basically choosing who's going to go on to dethrone Jon Moxley. Moxley could have maybe always won that match in a big upset, but really the winner of this match was going to be the next AEW World Champion. A lot of face versus face matches can often lack the intensity of a more traditional heel-face dynamic. Not this one, with the crowd split between both men and both of them managing to take us on just an absolute roller coaster. The unpredictability of this match was another of its real strengths. I remember in the build, I got the prediction wrong. I thought Ospreay was going to win and go on to beat Moxley. I know now that with Ospreay taking time off to recover from injuries, that maybe looks a bit foolish, but I promise back then in the build to this match, everybody was quite split. The match would have been a barn burner even without that element of unpredictability, but because it's there, and because the stakes are so high, and because everything's just at fever pitch, it really pushes it to the next level. It was almost my match of the year. Let's find out what was. Number 1 is Kenny Omega versus Gabe Kidd at Wrestle Dynasty. There were a lot of hateful matches in 2025. Very, very good ones, but I don't think any were quite the unique brand of hateful that Omega versus Kidd was back in January. I love matches where the heel and the face dynamic changes depending on your own perspective as a viewer. And that's exactly what happened here, with Gabe Kidd, usually very heelish in New Japan, suddenly defending the company's honor against Kenny Omega, the man who rose to the top of New Japan. And once he got to the top, he walked out to set up a rival promotion. The atmosphere in this one, and the fact it took place at Wrestle Dynasty, a co-branded show between those 2 promotions, it's just fantastic. Of course, that's a very high bar to live up to. And with Kenny Omega returning from a long time on the shelf, a lot of people had to wonder, will it be able to live up to that level of hype? Maybe that's why it wasn't the main event, just in case. But it should have been, because oh my word. Kenny proved he still got it. Gabe proved that he has so much potential. I think potential is the wrong word because you can't have a match of the year and still be showing potential. I guess you can, but Gabe had an absolute crazy match here. The performance, the hatred pouring out of him, the seething intensity, and then Kenny Omega doing everything he can to try and overcome this force of nature and not being really cheered on by the New Japan crowd. Certainly not by Chris Charlton of New Japan's English broadcast team. Yes, that's because this, of course, was the match where Chris Charlton was reportedly suspended for a little while after by New Japan for going in too hard on AEW and Tony Khan with some of his remarks on commentary. But it adds to it, though. It makes it feel real. This is a real blend of Japanese and Western wrestling dynamics, and also a real blend of personal animosity between Gabe and Omega, mainly from Gabe towards Omega, and interpromotional animosity as well. It's perfect, in my opinion. The action's superb. You need to watch it if you haven't already, and it's my match of 2025. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Jack the Jobber, and like, share, subscribe, all that sort of stuff if you've enjoyed this countdown, and leave any matches you feel that I have heartlessly snubbed in the comment section down below. Thanks once again, and I'll see you very soon.